Sweet.
Yeah,
So
Carlos and I were
works
just
to where-
chatting. And, well, it's good. We just found out we have a little delay, so we'll just keep that in mind. That could be any one of us. We deal with that sometimes, Carlos, and all we do is we just pause a little bit longer.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try to keep that in mind. Do you want me to turn that fan off?
I can't really hear it.
I can't hear it either.
Well, can you see it in the picture?
A little bit behind your head, yeah.
You want me to turn it off? I'll turn it off.
Sure. How's your Sunday going, man?
Oh, it's been good. More traveling, but we're good now. Got a different backdrop, if you can see. Been working on my studio a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say,
no
it not only looks good, but it sounds nice, too.
Yeah, we finally got Wi-Fi at like the old cabin we have on the property. So I'm testing things out from here because it's pretty quiet in this area, and yeah, it's a good backdrop, I figured.
Well, that's great. Well,
So
Carlos, we're super. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say the software you guys use fills in those gaps, right? It's like AI.
Yeah, it's getting better. It's not there 100%, but they try, and they get it right a lot of times.
Got it.
Well, anyway, thanks for joining us. We're really happy to have you. Kind of short notice even, and it's always an effort for all of us to get together and do this, but it's well worth it. But how was your trip up in the mountains? You said you went and you were hunting this past weekend?
No. I wasn't hunting. As a side hustle or a side deal, I build rock crawlers, buggies.
You do?
And so I was up there doing the off-road thing on an off-road trail here in California. Went camping overnight and just got outside. Hadn't done that in quite a while, so I need to get up there and get my fix.
Oh, man, that's kind of cool. I had no idea. When I was living in Colorado, I don't know if you've ever worked for a guest ranch or worked on a ranch where you got a long day of work and you get sent home to the bunkhouse and you have nothing to do, but you have a great internet signal. So I'd surf YouTube a bunch, and there's a channel, and I think they might be on Discovery, but it's called Dirt Every Day. And you got the two guys that are always building stuff and driving it around in the desert.
Oh yeah.
And
I watched.
Yeah.
Them.
Yeah. They're pretty good, huh?
Yeah. They do some crazy stuff. Those guys have guts, a lot more guts, and put stuff together, just cobble stuff together and see if it'll last. And oh yeah. Yep.
Man. So why are you doing leather work? You're not building buggies instead.
Everything starts as a hobby, and then you turn it into a business. And when you turn it into a business, sometimes it's not as fun.
Yeah.
So the leather or the metal work is a reprieve from the leather work when I get burned out. So
yeah. So what do you have right now that you take out and bomb around on?
It's a full tube rock buggy that I built about 6 years ago. And it used to have, it's got a Toyota drivetrain in it that I got out of a 98 4Runner. And it used to have Toyota axles, but I kept on going through ring and pinion in the rear. So I built some Dana 60 big 1-ton axles for it and put them on. It's probably about a year ago now. So, but no, it gets with it. It's a lot of fun. It'll go anywhere. So crazy articulation, crazy suspension travel, big sticky tires. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. Do you run bead locks on that?
Yeah, it's got bead locks on it.
kind of have to, huh? So do you have a whole shop
Yeah.
and a lift and everything?
I sure do. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. I've got all kinds of metal fabrication equipment. My uncle and I went in partners and bought out a buddy of mine that used to have an off-road fabrication shop. And so we've got a CNC plasma table. We've got tubing benders. We got welders. We got just about everything you need or want to do metal work with. So
Wow. So you're not just weekend warriors. You guys have got your crap together when it comes to that. You know, because those shows, they fool you so much. Like even Dirt Every Day. I'd watch that. And those guys, it looks like they do it on a Sunday afternoon. They buy some old van and go pick apart, some axles and get some seats and an engine, and they just throw it together. And if something doesn't fit, they get the Sawzall out. And I had a 1995 K3500 GMC dually with the old 6.5 diesel. And man, I wanted to lift that thing so bad, but I didn't want to do an IFS front suspension lift. So all those shows made it look so easy. I was on Craigslist and I almost bought a set of Dana axles, and I was gonna, I guess, in the driveway, cut the suspension out, and I was looking at kits where you could weld the hanger mounts on there. And I had an old like plug-in, spark box welder, and I was gonna just do it. And then I ended up moving around that time. But I don't know what would have happened. I probably would have cut into the truck, and there probably would have been a listing on Facebook Marketplace for a GMC with the suspension cut out of the front of it, because I doubt I would have got it back together. But it just looks so easy in those shows, and I'd watch them all the time, and I was like, man, I can do this. I'm sure I can do this. Clearly, you either end up with the tools that you have or you don't do it at all.
Well, a guy can do a lot with very little tools, but the thing is when you get in the middle of it and you figure out how much work it really is and how much you don't really know. There's a lot of people out there on Craigslist selling half-started projects because they get in the middle of them and they figure out, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't have the time, or my wife said get it out of the driveway, or you're spending too much money. So there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
But you could definitely do it, Ben. It's just it's just like anything. You do the horsemanship stuff. You got to screw it up a bunch before you figure it out. And the only thing is the thing that makes it different with rock crawling versus doing something that goes fast is, at least if you didn't quite get it figured out and it breaks, at least you're not going very fast. So
Where do you live?
I'm in Northern California.
Okay.
So the Sierras are right, 2 hours away. There's trails. There's an abundance of off-road trails for us. There's some of the most world famous off-road trails in my backyard, basically. So there's people that like the Rubicon Trail and the Fordyce Trail. There's people that fly in from all over the world just to go on the trail because it's a world famous trail. So that's one really cool thing about being in California.
Well,
there's not a lot of cool things about being in California, but that's one of them.
that's what I was going to say. You guys are probably scraping the bottom of the pot for good reasons to keep living there and enjoying it. I've never been to California, and most people that I talk to say that's one of the most beautiful states in our country. But so I'd love to go. If I've never been to California, where should I go first if I want to see this beautiful state?
Are you an ocean guy?
Well, no, I describe myself as land, and then, probably land, and then sea, and then air. Sea and air would be a close tie. I'm not afraid of flying. I just think if I ever became a pilot, I'd become too overconfident, and I'd flirt with danger, and I'd probably eat the dirt. So at least the sea I can swim.
Yeah.
But land first.
Yeah, so I would recommend going to Yosemite first. That's the national park. There's going to be a ton of people there, but you got to see that. And then anywhere in the Sierras. There's all kinds of beautiful places in the Sierra Nevada mountain range here. You can go to Tahoe, which is going to be a bunch of people, but it's a beautiful lake. There's all kinds of outdoor activity. There's a bunch of trails if you like to hike. There's a bunch of off-road trails if you can get in with somebody that will take you on an off-road trail. It's beautiful. There's all kinds of stuff to see. And unfortunately, it's just harder to get away from people, but just because we're so overpopulated, and everybody else knows about it. But yeah, you definitely got to see it. And if you stay up in the northern half of California, it's I guess more like-minded people, we'll say. So
Yeah.
it's not all San Francisco and Hollywood. When I moved to Montana, when I was in Montana outside of high school, that's what people thought. People hear California and they think of Hollywood or San Francisco, and it's definitely not all that. So
Yeah. Well, okay. So for folks listening, you are, I believe you're the owner of, I know you as Carlos Macias from Buckaroo Gear.com. Yep. You made my first pair of armitas, and you did a great job, by the way. Still have them. I love those things. And
awesome.
So you're a big name in especially the Buckaroo Gear world, and you're well known for your stuff. I mean, most of the guys, I know we're talking about a very small niche community, but most people know who Carlos Macias is. How did you get into doing leather work? Are you a ranch kid? Did your family have a ranch, or you must have somehow you were influenced to build cowboy gear? So how did you get started?
Well, how much time do we have? Do you want the long version or the short
We
version?
have all the time in the world.
I am not a ranch kid. I was born and raised in town. Nobody in my family, with the exception of my aunt, even had horses. And she does the drill team thing, at the rodeos. They have a team called the Painted Ladies where they do the drill team at the grand entry, or they'll do it's not the halftime show, but it's a show during the rodeo they do. But no, growing up, I always wanted to be a cowboy. I always wanted to have horses. I always wanted to do the thing, and I was raised in town. So in high school, I thought the best way to do that, or to get a foothold or get a foot in the door, was to do the high school rodeo thing. And I tried to ride bareback broncs and saddle broncs, and I went to the hospital a few times, broke some bones, and quickly figured out that I was no good at that. So I was working for a cutting horse trainer. I started out just cleaning stalls, and then I started working for a cutting horse trainer and started getting on young horses for him. And that's kind of where I learned how to ride. And I wouldn't say learn how to ride. I guess I would say learn how to stay on a horse and not bother it, maybe. Although that's even loose too. But so out of high school, I decided I wanted to go to Montana State, and watching Lonesome Dove probably had something to do with that, because that's where they drove all the cattle to. And so we went up there, and I was going to go to college or go to school at Montana State University, and I was enrolled, but I wouldn't probably say I actually went to class very much. While I was there, I was working for the school ranch there, the horse program, which is where I'm pretty sure that Riata was teaching the colt starting there at one point at Montana State University. But anyway, while I was there, I was working there at the school horse program, or the horse place. I don't know what you want to call it. And what happened next? I started working for Pete Melnicker, Tying Halters, Double Diamond Halter Company. I'm sure you know.
Yeah. I met him once at the old, at the last Legacy of Legends. I met him down there.
Yeah, and he was at this last show in Ogden too. But anyway, when you're in Montana in the winter, that was a good job to have if you were a college kid and didn't have very many skills other than riding horses or riding colts. And so his shop was heated, and he'd let you work as long as you wanted, tie as many halters as you could. So he taught me how to tie halters, and while I was there, he introduced me to Buck Brannaman, not personally, but to his ways of horsemanship, because at the time I was also working on a ranch that bred a bunch of crossbred warm bloods, not warm bloods, but cold bloods with like a two-eyed jack stud. And what this guy was doing was outfitting. He was helping guide and get hunters into the backcountry, and he would crossbreed all these horses because of he needed them to pack. He didn't like packing mules, so he would breed Belgian mares to this two-eyed jack stud, and he also had an Andalusian horse or an Andalusian stud. There was all kinds of funky stuff going on there, but they had. He also had PMU mares. You know what PMU was?
No, I don't.
That's a deal, I think, up in that northern part of the country or Canada, where they collect the urine from the mares and they use it to make, I think, products, medicines for females, like birth control, stuff like that, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so they would breed these mares, and they'd get the colts off them, for next to nothing, and try to make a horse out of them. So we had a bunch of those that we had to ride. And so long story short, during the winter, we didn't have an indoor arena, so we couldn't ride very much. I started working for Pete Melniker. I had a couple horses that were pretty bad to flip over on me, and that's when I learned about the hindquarters, just from watching the VHS tapes of bucks. We had to... Jeff and I lived in a 16-foot camp trailer, and we'd go down and we rented a VCR, and then we got those tapes from Pete, and that's when they were on VHS, the colt starting tapes and the groundwork tapes and stuff like that. And, so I thought I wanted to be a cowboy, and I thought that's what I wanted to do, and I rode horses for quite a while. I didn't really get much into the cowboying part of it or the stockmanship part of it, but I was really kind of passionate about horsemanship and roping, and after a couple of winters up there in Montana and kind of flunking out of school, I came back to California and was working for my dad, and then riding colts for a racehorse trainer at the same time, and then also riding horses, kind of outside horses. I know you guys kind of do that. I think Joe said he does that too. We used to call them 30-day shitters at the time. But yeah, I've been there, did all that, and I went back to school and I learned website design. And I was also taking computer science classes at the local community college, and that was about 1999, 2000, and I decided I was going to design an online horse tack and cowboy gear store, and that's where Buckaroo Gear actually started, because I started that store way back in 2000, and it was originally called Lost Buckaroo, and why I came up with that name, I don't know. LostBuckaroo.com. But everybody would leave the T off of Lost. They just thought it was Los, L-O-S, or Loss. So, Buckaroo Gear was available, BuckarooGear.com. So that was a lot more fitting. So I added that on. And
so, what year was that you first? I guess when was it that you were taking internet courses and then launched your first website?
So it would have been 1999 or 2000. And that's when I launched the first website, and it was called Lost Buckaroo, in 2000. And
so at that time, see, I mean, obviously I was alive in 99, but I wasn't surfing the web. So what kind of browser and internet service were you working with at that point?
So there's the background, Joe. We got the normal background.
Yeah. Just to cut in real quick, Joe, so I just got off this trip, and we can talk about that more later. But like when you went to the cult starting, you know, people do watch on the move. Some people do. And they say hi and stuff. And the thing I heard the most was they like your background and they like my background. They didn't say much about the content, but they're all about the background. So sort of like Derek with more plates, more dates, you might just need to keep that background. And it's just part of the foundation of this show, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's like you just stick with it long enough and it becomes your style, right? Even if it started out of necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of grown on me
I always
too.
wanted to know what the story was. I always kind of wanted to know what the story was with the background, if you're under construction or what you're doing there.
Oh yeah, this is just me in my unfinished basement.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So I didn't. The house I refurbished back in 2001. I didn't finish the basement, but I did put insulation all through the basement because it's one of those deals where like half the basement is underground, and then if you go out the back, like there's a door out the back because I'm kind of on the side of a hill. So
Got it.
yeah, it's just like the insulation I use to cover the unfinished basement. That's all it is.
Got it.
Of course, we'll edit that part out so there's more mystery behind it.
Yeah, he didn't realize at the time we were going to be world famous podcasters with a big, well-known show. You know, you just can't know these things at a time.
I'm not going to lie. I messed with my background for quite a while. I even put that banner up, so it looked kind of cool. So,
yeah, I had one person tell me it looks like I podcast from solitary confinement, like a padded room or something. It's no wonder I don't have my like arms strapped to my sides or something.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Joe works with horses. He's doing that BLM Mustang program for the inmates.
Yeah, there you go.
If that's the case, you probably know some horses that need to be in a padded room.
Yeah. Anyway, Joe, you didn't miss a whole lot. Carlos was filling me in on what he was doing this weekend. He was driving a buggy around in California. He builds like off-roading rigs, and so we were chatting about that.
Oh, okay.
But then he was telling us the story about how he got started, and we were just talking about when he started his first internet business. Well, he started his first website for buckaroogear.com in '99.
Oh, wow. That's like early adopting for the Western industry.
Yeah, so I started it in 2000, but yeah, close enough. Here's the buggy.
Close enough. Yeah, it's all ancient history anyway. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that thing's serious, man.
Yeah,
that's like Mad Max.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
So I've always been curious about that because that's like a big out west thing. I've actually got a buddy I went to high school with who moved out to Utah and got really big into that. Like he was working in one of those fabrication shops where they like built custom rigs and everything. When you go to do that, are you going out to like federal or state land or something, or like how do you find places to do that?
That's what I was telling Ben. There's an abundance of state, well, not government land out here. You know, federal, national forest,
right?
And that's basically where we're at. It's either national forestry land, it's BLM. There's a ton of it out here, and that's what's so good about the area we live in. You know, there's some of the most world famous trails, right? You know, kind of in my backyard, 2 hours away. So.
And where exactly? Because you're in California, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So where exactly in California are you?
I'm in Northern California, just outside of Sacramento. So I'm in the Central Valley. So I'm 2 hours from the ocean, and I'm 2 hours from the Sierra Nevadas.
Yep.
And up here in the northern part of the valley, it gets pretty hot.
Yeah.
But it's California. The weather, for the most part, is pretty good. I can't complain about it too much.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, in my old life, I did a lot of work for water utility companies in California, so I'm familiar. With Sacramento. I'm sure you're probably in a little more rural area than that, but I am familiar with that area. And yeah, it's a pretty part of the country. If you could maybe figure out some of the politicians, it'd be about perfect.
Well, that's what I was telling Ben. It's like there's a couple of pluses to living here, and yeah, as soon as my daughter graduates and she's out of high school and we figure out what she's going to do, we're probably going to bail too. We're going to move at least over the other side of the mountain to Nevada, just because the politics are just not my deal here. So
yeah. Sure. Well, I hope you guys deal with it and you don't export it, because if they're talking about Gavin Newsom running for president, then we're all going to be in the same boat, Carlos. We'll just be one big happy family.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it's not the California is it doesn't, the politics here in California don't actually represent everybody that lives here. And when you have such an abundance of people voting one way, it kind of creates a monopoly on the vote, for lack of a better term. I know there's a better term for it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So the city centers and the population centers vote for everybody, which really sucks. They're not speaking for the farmer out in Nebraska,
Yeah. Were you born and raised in California?
Yeah, I sure was. Yep.
Okay. That same area?
Yep. Right here in a town called Elk Grove, which is the town I was raised in, and then I'm in Wilton, which is just east of Elk Grove now.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. And so 2000 was when you started your first website?
Yeah, so I was telling Ben, I went to after I got back from Montana. I was in Montana because I went up there to go to school up at Montana State University, and I did a lot more. I did a lot of stuff, but I didn't necessarily go to class. So when I got back from there after freezing our butt off for a couple of years because we were living in a 16-foot camp trailer, I was working for my dad, who owns a landscape construction business, and then I was riding colts on the side. And I went back to school and basically went to school to learn two things: web design and typing. Because typing wasn't a big deal when I was in high school. Computers were around, personal computers were around, but they were just kind of in the infancy stage, So while I was at community college there learning about web design, I decided I'd start the first internet horse tack and cowboy gear store. And that's what I did in 2000. And it was called lostbuckaroo.com originally. And
okay.
So a lot of people leave the T off of lost, like lost and found. They thought it was LOS. So Buckaroo Gear was available. The domain name was available. So I went ahead and picked that up. And that's a lot more fitting anyway. So
it seems like if you were one of the first cowboy tack online stores, there would have been a lot of domain names available.
Yeah, so we're talking back in the day. You asked what it was, what our browsers were, and the internet connection back then was dial-up. And there was a few places in town, you could get like cable high-speed internet, but it wasn't anything like it is now. So I started the website on a dial-up modem, and we still had it was Internet Explorer, I think, was the Microsoft version of the product. And we had I designed a website on a software called Front Page, Microsoft Front Page, and I learned how to do HTML coding and stuff like that. So I had to backdoor a lot of that stuff. But back then it wasn't nearly as easy as it is now to start an online store. You had all these separate products. You had a payment gateway, you had a payment processor, you had a shopping cart system, you had the website, which was just the entity for the browsing part that that hosted all of your photos and information, and everything had to kind of talk to each other, because back then e-commerce, which is what it's all encompassing now, was a brand new thing. So, and I'm fairly certain I am the very first internet-based horse tack and cowboy gear store. Of course, there were other big catalog companies like Brighton Feed and Saddlery, and of course Capriola was around, but they didn't have an internet presence.
Yeah. So at the time, and you know, it's funny for us in our generation, the way's been pretty well paved to do business online. So at the time when you were starting that, were you strictly online, or were you a brick and mortar establishment as well?
I've always been strictly online.
Wow. So how did you drive sales to an online business when there were very few online businesses, much less in the cowboy tack world? And I mean, I would think the demographic of people you're trying to sell gear to aren't, you know, the most computer savvy folks, probably some of the last folks to get a computer and be going online.
So I guess I should probably rephrase that. I've never had a brick and mortar store. My emphasis was always strictly online for sales, but I had to make adjustments to that and print a catalog. And
okay.
I printed a catalog for, I think, 9 years, and it was a home printed catalog. I got a big printer here that would print duplex, so both sides of the page. And my wife at the time was stapling them together. And but you know, it was anybody to break into this kind of demographic was you had to advertise in the Western Horseman. So advertise in the back of the Western Horseman. You have that little Shopper's Corral ad, the little 1 by or 1.5 by 2 or whatever it is, and you know, I would put on there internet, you know, website or web-based internet horse tack cowboy gear store, and then I'd also put call for a free catalog. And you could tell every time the ad would come out because the phone would start ringing and people would be wanting a catalog. So I had to play that game for quite a while and send catalogs out until people sort of caught on, because like you said, most of the demographic, number one, probably didn't even own a computer. Number two, didn't know how to get on the internet. Number three, probably barely could, because just like me, they were on dial-up. So a lot of it was educating the customer on how to use the website, and then establishing, you know, trust with the people of who I was and what I was actually doing. In the first 3 years of business, I didn't do leather work. I was just buying and reselling gear. And the reason I knew that was going to be a good model is because there wasn't a widely known place to get good gear, you know, especially out east, you know. So the internet makes cataloging the products a lot more feasible because it's free, right? You have to pay to host your website, but you can have as many pages and pictures and as lengthy a description of a product as you want, versus printing a catalog, a paper catalog. So that's kind of where it started, and then after I think 2009, I phased out printing the catalog. I'm like, I'm not doing this no more. It's just too much trouble.
So when you started, you were talking about how there weren't a lot of well-known places to get good quality gear. When you had the idea to start this, did you have connections in place, like you from your vendors and your suppliers, where you felt good about that before you ever started building the website, or like which came first there? So
yeah, you missed it before, but when I was at Montana State University, or when I was living up there trying to go to school, during the summer or during the winters, obviously it was a little harder to ride horses unless you had access to an indoor arena. And for extra money, I started working for Pete Malniker at Double Diamond Halter Company, tying halters. And working for him is where I started to get an education on what good gear was, and knowing where to find good gear and what to look for as far as a quality piece of using gear. And along with that goes hand in hand being introduced to folks like Buck Brannaman, not personally, but just through his videos and his ways of horsemanship. None of this could be possible without folks like Ray Hunt and Buck Brannaman, because they not only do they educate people on horsemanship, but they educate people on good gear. And so it all kind of goes hand in hand, and the timing of everything kind of hit at the right time. Just like at the time, I'm sure you guys heard of the Californios, the big roping and stockmanship competition they had. That all was part of the timing and the success of Buckaroo Gear for me as well. So, but yeah, to have connections, to go back to your question, as far as having a connection, Pete Melnicker would have been my first connection, because he was the first one that would wholesale to me, because I used to work for him, and we established a friendship and a relationship there. So,
Gotcha. That makes sense. So then for your story, that got you to 2009, you said.
Yeah, so 2009 I stopped printing the catalog. If we back up, 2003, my wife at the time and I bought a place out here in Wilton and built a house, and I also built a shop. And like I said, I wasn't really doing leather work myself. I was just buying and reselling gear. I did a little bit of leather work. I would buy the like the nice Manel stirrups, and I would line them myself before I shipped them out. So that was a little bit, just a tiny bit of leather work. And I was doing like Bozell hangers and stuff like that, but just small stuff. And the reason being is because I was living in a little house, and I just didn't have space for equipment to do any of the leather work myself. But in 2003, when we built the place out here that I'm living in now, I had room to build a shop, and I sectioned off a part of the bigger shop for Buckaroo Gear for the business. And so at the time, that little shop was 10 by 24. So it was just a little shoebox by the time you put all your workbenches and your sewing machine stuff in it. But right then at 2003, I got a sewing machine, and I went up to the hide house and got some leather, and I built my first set of armitas. And I have them here hanging on the wall. But I built those for Jeff, my buddy Jeff, and it just kind of all snowballed from there. I started trying to build headstalls, and quickly figured out headstalls were way too much work for the amount of return you get on them. And so I stuck with the armitas and started improving and developing that design, and started putting them out there. A lot of people didn't know what armitas were, and they hit pretty hard and became very popular. And the Californios has a lot to do with that too. But just the power of the internet has a lot to do with that, because people, a lot of people saw armitas for the first time, and then, yeah, it just kept on going from there, developing my chinks pattern, my armita pattern. Later on, I started doing shotguns, because shotguns are a whole different animal. But yeah, I'll keep on going on and on and on and keep blabbing. You guys are leading this dance, so let me know what you want to know.
Well, that's something I wanted to ask you about, because you have a very, widespread reputation for making excellent armitas. Everybody says, go to Carlos. And so that first pair, did you have a pattern? Did you have a mentor? How did you even know what armitas were? Was that Jeff's idea? Like, how does one break into building? It's because it's a pair of clothing, essentially. And clothing seems easy to build, but you go try to make a Western shirt, it's not going to work out that well if you don't have a pattern or somebody to show you.
So some of the guys that I used to work for, that cutting horse trainer that I used to work for in high school, he's an old Tonopah cowboy. He was from Tonopah, Nevada, and he'd been around some of the Buckaroo kind of stuff early on, and he was married to one of the Marvel's daughters, and he had one of the old original Wades made by Capriola's way back in the day, and he used to let me ride it, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But I had seen some of the guys that we'd go and day work with or go brand with or whatever. I'd seen some of the guys wearing armitas, and so I knew about them when I started building them, but not a lot of people knew about them. And as far as a pattern is concerned, what I did was I just took a pair of old chinks that I had and figured out what I liked about them, what I disliked about them, and just started developing my own pattern and figuring out how to make them look like armitas or my version of armitas, and just kept on going from there. As I got further into it, I met Peter Campbell, and Peter Campbell and I became really good friends, and I used to host a clinic here with him, and he helped me develop one of the patterns that I use a lot now, or just one of the styles that I use a lot now, and that became really popular as well. So it just kind of kept evolving. But as far as somebody teaching me how to do it, it's been all self-taught for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And for people out there who are listening, and I was in this category for a long time before I knew that you were going to come on. I know chinks and armitas are different, but can you describe, what makes them, where the differentiation lies, and maybe, if you're actually using them, what feels different, like maybe a chap versus a chink versus an armita?
So the way I've read it and the way I've learned it is, so chaps, there's many different types of chaps. And chaps generally are a full length type of legging. They're all leggings, right? They all cover your legs, so they all fall under the category of a legging. But a chap is a full length, so from your hip bone all the way down to generally your toe. And there's many different ways to make chaps. There's shotgun chaps, there's batwing chaps, there's Arizona bells. There's a bunch of different ways to make chaps. And the way I understood it was, back in the day, the Texas cowboy or the cow puncher would wear chaps. And chaps generally only had a couple of straps around the back of the leg, maybe 3. And they were more like a batwing that you see now. And back in those days, we didn't have a lot of pavement. Cowboys were working year round. You had a lot of mud in the winter, and those chaps would end up rotting on the bottom. And what they would do is cut them off, and that's where you got your chinks. So your chinks started from there, and back in the day, it was just simplistic using gear. There was not a lot of most of your working cowboys didn't probably have the money to buy stuff that was really fancy with a lot of, silver and things like that. So that would be your story with chaps and chinks. For armitas is a California thing. So the Californios used to wear what they called armitas, and armitas means little armor in Spanish. And the original armitas were what the Californios would wear as a legging or a chap. And for the most part, they were very small, they were very rudimentary, and they would only cover the top of the leg because they were generally made out of a deer hide or an elk hide. And a deer hide is much smaller than a cow hide. So it would barely only cover the top of your leg, and you'd have no hardware back in the day. So they'd have rolled button knots that kind of fastened, strapped to the back of the leg, and then a wrap and tie waist belt that would tie it around the waist. But most of your chaps and most of your armitas back in the day were very simple. They didn't have a lot of fringe, they didn't have a lot of looks to them, a lot of frill. Everything I build now is, for a lot of it, although they're very functional, a lot of it is for looks too, with the extra long fringe and the different colors and all the stuff that you see now that most folks are wearing. So I guess that answer your question about what the differences are. Chinks, the difference between chinks and armitas would be based upon what I build. Chinks have a stamped belt top. Most of the time they'll have a stamped belt top on them, and armitas will have a fringe apron on them. Chinks, because of that stamped belt top, will from the beginning, from the get-go, won't be as comfortable as a pair of armitas, because armitas are all chap leather around the waist. Whereas with the chinks that have a stamped belt top on them, you have to there's a breaking in period because you have that stiffer, firmer skirting leather that holds the look of the stamp, which is around the waist. And people call them belt tops. I call them belt tops. Some people call them yokes around the waist there, where all the where the stamping is. But that's the main difference. Is the chinks will have stamped belt tops on them, where the armitas have a fringe apron. And back in the day, when the vaqueros were making armitas, or the Californios, whatever you want to call them, they didn't have back the front, and sometimes it would just be barely scalloped, but they wouldn't have all the fringe that the armitas of today have.
What's the functionality of the apron style fringe on the armitas?
I don't think there's any actual specific functionality to the fringe or the apron. The fringe apron is just for looks, for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, it looks really cool. I was always telling people, well, I don't really know. I could pontificate, but you probably know, what is the original functionality of fringe?
Well, I can tell you this: if the fringe isn't long enough and you're riding in the rain, the rain will go down into the top of your boots, especially if you shotgun your boots. I don't really know, other than it just looks cool. It looks cool.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I've heard too. It flings the rain off. So I assumed that the armita apron kind of flings the rain off your crotch area. Like when you're riding, you know how you can keep yourself totally dry, and then you look down at the horn of your saddle, and then you get like a big old gutter stream of rain right down the front.
And you got to be careful.
So I don't know if it makes a big difference, but they do seem like they spread some of that moisture out.
Yeah, and you got to be careful with that apron fringe too, because if it gets to be too long, you can end up getting it wrapped in your dallies. And I see a lot of guys that pull that fringe out there, not on purpose, but just because. And so you got to be careful about that too. And there's a lot of other things we could go into as far as functionality and the way I build my chinks versus a lot of people ask questions about it, but I think for me, the style I like to build in, I like to have long fringe. I like to have a good drape to them, and I like them to move with you and the horse and look cool, as much as I want them to be functional and protect your leg. So.
Yeah, I'm sure you don't want to give away a bunch of trade secrets. But I would like to know, anything you would like to divulge, because I'm very interested in people that make these things, and we just send you our measurements and they show up in the mail and they fit like a glove. And
I'm an open
that's kind of
book.
neat.
As far as trade secrets, there's very few things I won't tell you. I started teaching about a year ago, and I've kind of moved on from that starvation thinking of not sharing information. I think if you know something, you ought to share it, especially as you get older, because you need this tradition and the craft to move on, or to live on, just like the horsemanship thing. So.
Yeah, we've had that conversation a few times on here, and we've had different opinions. But I know, and we've said it a lot of times, a rising tide raises all the boats. And I know some people that teach horsemanship or do somewhat like you and make gear, and they think that people need to pay something, pay a monetary amount in order to appreciate appreciate the information that they're receiving. But it seems like, I mean, maybe for some people, but it seems like there probably is only one way to really appreciate it. And it's kind of like near the beginning of the podcast when you were talking about like trying bucking horses and then trying this and riding colts until you were kind of not going to do that anymore. And you have appreciation, I'm sure, for every bit of information that has come along for you, whether you paid with money or not. And so I'm sure early on you had someone tell you something that would have been very valuable now, but you didn't even realize it then. So it wouldn't matter if they charged you money for it or not. You weren't even ready to hear it. And so we get that argument back and forth, but I think I agree with you that, you know, you can kind of put it out there, and if anything, you're probably going to gain customers because they're going to enjoy hearing about how you do what you do and what goes into it. And if they're really a maker, then they're going to totally appreciate it, take it and run with it, and they're not going to stab you in the back. And if they're not a maker and they're not skilled, it's not going to really affect them anyway. They're just going to appreciate what you do and buy your product. And so it's kind of a win-win. And then there is the oddball guy who's going to stab you in the back, and his business probably isn't going to take off anyway.
What do they say? Copying you is the highest form of flattery. And there's been plenty of people that copy, you know. But I used to be of that way of thinking when I was a younger guy of, you know, I'm not going to share information, or anybody out there that's building a set of leggings is my competition. And as I've gotten older, and I guess hopefully wiser, I've learned that that way of thinking, that starvation way of thinking, and not sharing of information is really is fruitless. You know, when you share with somebody that you truly know appreciates it, it's probably the most rewarding thing. One of the most rewarding things you can do as an individual, if you have knowledge of something and you're sure of it, helping people in any kind of way is pretty rewarding, very rewarding. So I used to think that way, though. I used to think, you know, you don't deserve to know, or, you know, the ego gets in the way, especially as a young man, the ego gets in the way. That's all bad vibes, bad juju in the end, especially as you get older, because it does not serve you in any kind of way unless you want to be alone. So.
So have you found now that you are an established leather worker, because I know for me, when I go to like a clinic, or say I go to a Buck Brannaman clinic, right? Not only is obviously the main objective is to go and learn from Buck Brannaman, but it helps me connect with all these other people. And we've talked about it on the podcast here. Like, that's a big part of this podcast, is to foster more of a community, whether it be with makers or horsemanship, or, you know, how it's all intertwined. Do you have folks, like, do you have people that you'll call to, like, do you have a handful of people that you're like, okay, these guys, I trust their honest opinion. If I want to try something new, I'm going to talk to them.
Absolutely. One of them being Sarah Hagel. She's a very close friend of mine, and she's helped me out a lot. The other one being John Willemsma. Mm-hmm. You guys know John Willemsma? He's a saddle maker. He's been building saddles for like 48 years. He's been a really close friend. I call and bounce ideas off of a number of other makers. There's younger makers now that are younger than me that call me to do the same thing, and I'll call them, you know, because they might have some information or opinion that I want to hear. it's we all run in the same circle. So it's a very tight knit. You mentioned community. It's a very tight knit community, like you said, especially in this kind of small niche. If you would want to call it a horsemanship world or gear world or whatever, it all kind of runs together. Like going to the Pro-Am Open just a couple of weeks ago is like a big family reunion, right? So, but yeah, those would be some of the people that I call. I'll call Pete Malnicker still and just ask him business advice and business questions, because there's the whole other element, to this that people don't even talk about or realize a lot of times, is the whole business end of it. You can build a really nice product, but you still got to be a businessman. You got to know customer service. You got to know shipping. You got to know web design. You got to know all this other stuff. And, I've always done it from day one all myself. So having people like that to bounce ideas off of and visit with is invaluable.
Well, and you mentioned a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm sure there was probably an established base closer to where you were in terms of a customer base, but the East Coast, it seems like this style of horsemanship, and then obviously the gear that comes with it, is only growing, at least from what I can tell. And when I go down to where Ben is, I think the same thing's happening down there. And so it's one of those things where, if everyone was kind of secretive and kept to themselves, say you've got, 1,500 people that will buy leatherwork from you, and there's like 3 guys. So the 3 of you are competing over 1,500 people. Well, maybe now there's 3 times as many people. Maybe now there's 9 kind of high-end upper echelon makers. But now there's, 8,000 people that want to buy this gear, right? Because it's been spread and the information is readily available. Like that seems to be from a either a merchant or provider standpoint, the customer base will always grow much faster than the competition in terms of how many other competitors there are. And I feel like that's something I see riding horses for the public, like it's not a bad thing that there are other people the next county over riding horses for the public. It's a good thing, because hopefully if there's more good horses around, there'll be more people riding horses, and it'll just keep growing from there.
It's an experience-based thing. Like, as long as it's a positive experience for the most part for the person that's doing it, they're going to talk about it. And there's no better advertisement than word of mouth. Whether you're actually trying to sell something as a service or as a maker or, as a podcaster, it's going to be that word of mouth is going to be what spreads it and what builds it. And, as far as for me, for the gear and for selling the gear, I can't help but think I wouldn't be as successful as I am today if it weren't for folks like Buck Brannaman and Peter Campbell and Ray Hunt, because they're bringing the experience that goes along with all of it, meaning the horsemanship, the gear, the environment, the culture, and we all sort of fit into that little circle somehow. So
This episode of On the Move is brought to you by Lance and Sunshine Fralick Quarter Horses. Guys, Ben and I both ride horses for the public, and we can attest to what a difference it makes to have good genetics and a good mind to develop a horse. Lance and Sunshine Fralick Quarter Horses is having a production sale at their ranch, which is located about 60 miles south of Bismarck, North Dakota, near the South Dakota border. Their ranch is in the heart of beautiful ranch country, and these guys are AQHA heritage breeders, and the family's been raising quarter horses for about 75 years now. They make horses that are meant to be on a ranch. All their horses have substance, good bone, good feet, athleticism, and a sound trainable mind. They run about 70 brood mares that live out like horses. They have big pastures and they foal outside. So these foals, from day one when they hit the ground, they're dealing with the elements and learning how to survive. When I first got into horsemanship, I thought of the Fralick horses as big, stout, good using type horses for ranching. But now they brought in some more athletic bloodlines, I'd say. And man, the last horse I bought from them, I was very impressed. It wasn't just kind of your big standard ranch horse, although they still have those bloodlines aplenty. Let's talk about some of the studs they're using. They've got 5 stallions right now with bloodlines from studs like Gallo de Ciejo, Colonel Freckles, Missing Cash, Highbrow Cat, SDP Blue Blood, Two-Eyed Jack, McKeague, and Joe Quincy. They also use some AI sires, and that includes studs like Woody B. Tough, KC Pick, Barry Black Magic, Metallic MVP, and SDP Blue Blood. Like Lance and Sonny said on our show, they've learned from past podcast guests like Buck Brannaman and Joe Walter. And that's important because when you buy a horse from them, you're not going to be buying a horse with baggage. And that goes a long way. So if you're looking for a horse that you can use on the ranch or in the arena, their production sale is Saturday, September 23rd. The preview is going to start at 10 a.m. Central Time, and the sale is going to commence at 2 p.m. Central Time. If you want to look at the sale catalog, it's available online at jfranchhorses.com. For those that can't attend in person there in North Dakota, there is a DV auction online that will be available. At this sale, they're going to be offering 30 weanlings that are lightly halter broke, 20 yearlings that lead, tie, and load, and 12 great riding horses that range from ages 2 to 12 years old. Again, I can't recommend Lance and Sunshine enough, guys. So if you're in the market for a horse, go to jfranchhorses.com or find Lance and Sunshine Fralick Quarter Horses on Facebook. Now back to the show.
Yeah. Well, and even like you said, you didn't end up riding broncs and you didn't end up riding colts for a living, and you found this avenue. Heck, you pioneered the first online tack store in this world. So maybe there is too many horse trainers in one county at one point. Well, probably one of those guys might not just ride colts for the public. He'll probably find a niche, and he's going to service yet another area in the horse industry that needs help, so that the guys who do ride colts continue to have customers and they don't quit. They don't sell their horses because there's no farriers and no tack to buy and no guy coming to teach them at the clinics. And yeah, it all works together like one ecosystem. And this is reminding me, something else I wanted to ask you was kind of about the trade shows. I just saw you there at the Pro-Am, and there's some other makers there. And someone did mention there were less folks that showed up to that show than some of the others in the past. Do you guys make a lot of sales at an event like that, or is that more networking and just showing up to have a presence there? Because I imagine there's quite a bit of effort that goes into packing up all your stuff, bringing it there. Like I was hanging out with John from Capriola's, and I'm just looking at all of his bits and stuff and ropes, and I was thinking, man, you guys, you have to bring all this here, set up your panels, hang all your stuff up. It's tough enough for us just coming to spectate and rope a little bit. So how fruitful are those trips, and what is the objective of you guys going to those trade shows? Is it sales, or is it like networking?
Yeah, like you said, it is a shit ton of work. And not only is it a bunch of work just to get there and set up, but it's a bunch of work prior to have stuff to put in the booth. Like, I've got custom, my bread and butter is custom chinks, chaps, and armitas. And I've got custom orders, and I've got customers waiting on their stuff. And I'm trying to take care of them while also trying to build stuff to put in the booth at the show. So all the work leading up to it, it's a lot. But I would say the objective is all the above, Ben. Not only am I trying to get sales, but and I do. We did well there. It was good. It was definitely worth the trip. It not only does it set me up for sales on site, but it sets me up with orders that usually set up the first of my year for the next business year to start rolling on custom orders. So, but for the most part, in this day and age where you have internet and you have texts and all these different means of communication, all that stuff is impersonal. So you need to get out, my opinion, as a maker or any kind of business person, you need to get out in front of people and talk to them and establish a relationship or a rapport with them in person, because a lot of the context and personality doesn't come through in a text, right? Or, a phone call might be better. I prefer to talk on the phone to people, but a lot of people don't want to talk on the phone anymore. And I understand. Text makes it a lot easier for me too. I don't have to stop and answer the phone. I can just text, if I'm in the middle of the project, I can just text. But at a show like this last show at Ogden, I got to meet a number of customers like you that I hadn't met in person. And, they say, hey, I'm so-and-so. You built a pair for me. You built a pair for my wife. And, you get to shake their hand and visit with them and see how they're doing and put a face to a name, although I'm not great with names. That's what it's all about, is that would be the number one priority above all. And then, of course, if you can sell enough while you're there to pay for your trip, that's a plus. But anymore, as far as the shows for my specific demographic, I would say there's not very many of them to go to anymore. It used to be the Californios, which was a great show, and any vendor that used to go to that could tell you there's not much that can compare to that time. But there used to be that, and then there's the Pro-Am roping, and there used to be the Legacy of Legends show. And now basically I just go to the Pro-Am roping, and they're trying to start a deal. They'll have the first one here called I'm drawing a blank. I think it's called the Buckaroo Gathering. It's going to be in Winnemucca here in November. So we'll see what happens there. But I think the last show there might not have been as many people there as far as spectators are concerned, but it was still a really good show for us anyway, and it was good to see a lot of the people and visit with there was a lot of new faces, I would say, so.
Do you ever go up to that big loop roping in Jordan Valley?
I've never been there. I'd like to go someday, but I've never gone. Oh. And that's a culture in itself as well. There's a number of vendors that go every year, and I've never tried to break into that, but that'd be something I'd like to do.
Is that the same demographic though that would use armitas? Because I'm not like really deep into this culture yet. Obviously I'm around it, but it does seem to me like there's the horsemanship community, and then there's like the buckaroo, like actual everyday working cowboy community.
I would say yes and no. Some of those guys, especially in the Great Basin, they have their own, makers that they like to go to. A lot of guys make their own stuff because they can't afford to buy it. I don't know. I would think that some folks would buy some stuff, as far as armitas and chinks are concerned from me. But I could also tell you that over half my business are backyard horsemen and people that go to the clinics and just people that are specifically into horsemanship, not necessarily working cowboys and buckaroos. So I've got a mix of both. To see somebody that goes out and gets a pair dirty and worn out is refreshing. There's a few of those guys out there, but not a lot.
Have you ever thought about taking a booth and setting up at something like the NFR?
I've thought about it
and seeing how that goes.
I've gotten, because that's a huge time commitment. It's 10 days. It's 10 days just to be there in the booth.
Yeah.
And then, your travel back and forth, your setup. So I guess I always said if I went, I'd take a sewing machine with me so that I could work while I was there. But then if you do that, you get a bunch of people in there standing around watching you, and you're not going to get any work done anyway. So you'd have to take
Yeah, you could take a video of you doing some work, put that out front so they can all watch that, and then, or like a camera, like a live cam, and you're locked in a trailer with your sewing machine, and they can watch the live cam, but they can't actually talk to you.
That would be cool. Like I set up a little box trailer, right, and take it to like the colt starting that Buck does, or one of these bigger clinics, and just have it set up right there with the air conditioning, and just have a bunch of. I've thought about it. You have a bunch of blanks already cut out and ready to go, and you just sort of size them to whatever the person is, and build them for them on site. But shoot, I need.
You know what you could
that'd
do?
Be sick.
Yeah, you could do a plexiglass wall. Like we were at the Smithsonian a couple months ago, and they have these geologists in there, and they've got the headphones on, and they're doing very tedious work, but they had bulletproof glass that was like, it might have even been one-way glass, so you could watch them. You almost
like
felt bad for them that you were like breathing right over their shoulder, but they had no idea. They didn't care. Yeah. And they were in there doing this tedious geology work, and everybody could watch.
Yeah,
it'd be like a critter at the zoo.
But if a person's interested in what I'm doing, I'm kind of for it. But I don't like people that much. So,
well, Joe and I feel the same way. We just don't tell our clients that.
Can't do that.
Yeah. So here's a kind of a selfish question for us, because Ben and I. We don't know where this whole deal is going to go as far as on the move, but it is growing, and it's been cool to see it grow. And we've talked about maybe having a little more of a presence in the future, if there are events that might kind of be in line with our audience and things. Talk about when you started going to these events, and was there a learning curve for you in terms of how to navigate those, what to expect, maybe how to interact with folks?
So when I started going to events as a vendor, you mean?
Like, yeah, exactly.
So
like having a booth somewhere.
You guys probably are a lot better at this now because you're riding horses for the public. But after being in a shop for the last 20 years on my own, I'm kind of a social mute. So you've got to work on your resting bitch face. You have that? You've heard of that, I'm sure. I have one of those, I've been told. So you got to be a lot more outgoing. You got to smile a lot. You don't have facial hair, neither one of you. So that's definitely in your favor. No, but all kidding aside.
Tell that to Karsten.
Yeah. No. Yeah, exactly.
You can't even see his mouth.
It's if you're not a social person, it's definitely a hard step. But if you are a social person, I think, you could definitely benefit just from talking to people and getting their input and feedback. But if you went to a show, tell me, what would you guys be doing? Just trying to spread the word on the podcast, or would you be trying to get more interviews, or what would you be doing?
Yeah, so that's kind of like a peek behind the curtain question right there. But no, which isn't a bad thing. But no, I mean, right now for our podcast, and I'll keep this brief because this episode isn't about us. But I do think, if something like a Buck Brannaman Pro-Am, if we were there and had a presence, I think it would be like an amazing network opportunity, right? We're pretty fortunate. Honestly, a lot of this is like we have a guest on, and then they're like, you ought to talk to so-and-so, and then they get us linked up with so-and-so. And everyone's really friendly. But you could just kind of have a big multiplier effect if you were at one of those events. And then, it also wouldn't hurt to maybe be able to sell some ball caps and t-shirts and things like that. Get that out into the world.
Absolutely, because you guys have costs, right? And you've got to cover them. You can't do this for free. You're providing a product. You're providing entertainment value for people. I just talked to a guy that just came by and picked up a pair of chinks. He said he was on a road trip to Idaho and he was listening to you guys like nonstop. His name's Ryan Hathaway. Yeah.
Poor guy. Was he getting a little green behind the gills,
His
or
wife was
did he
still
look
working,
all right
so
still?
I think he's doing okay because she was in the car with him. So, but no, yeah, you guys. I think that would be a great idea. You guys get out there and do, what I say is FaceTime. You got to put a face to the name. You got to visit with people, and
yeah.
Yeah.
You got to shake hands
Yeah,
and kiss babies, man. You got to make this thing happen. Yeah. Cool. So what was your first outing as a vendor? And I guess, well, tell me when that was, because I'd be curious, if you started as just the online guy, there's some real kind of cost analysis going on, right? From no real overhead on an online store to now I'm going to commit to going somewhere.
So back then I wouldn't get all that technical with cost analysis or anything like that. I'd just be like, well, I've got all this shit hanging on the wall and I got to sell it. So the first show was Backcountry Horseman's Rendezvous in Tulare, California, and there was in Tulare, California is where they have the World Ag Expo. So went there. I had this big elaborate booth that was really kind of cool looking. It had a false front on it that looked like the front of a mission, old California mission, and it was all made out of wood. I made it here in the shop, and it was super heavy and a pain in the ass to move around. But I went down there with a couple pairs of armitas and answered a bunch of questions about what they were. And I didn't have mule-size halters, so that was definitely against me. And we had some saddles that I took from John, and a lot of people were kicking them and saying they were way too expensive. And so at that point, I learned about demographics and who my crowd was. But it was a good learning experience because you get out in front of people, you learn how to visit with people, you learn how to talk about your product, and you figure out how to take the money. That's a whole nother thing that you got to figure out. You're not a retail sales guy. You're not used to working at the checkout counter at the grocery store. So you got to figure that part out too. The credit card thing and all that too. So what little sales I had there, I learned a bunch.
Yeah. That's one of those deals where we've had that with this show and kind of any endeavor you get into. It seems like there's going to be a lot of just kind of treading in place for a while before you ever make any headway. But it's all super valuable because, like you said, you're learning all the tools you need to really make headway in the future. But you kind of have to be willing to take those licks and stand still for a little bit.
Right? I hate to be cliche and talk about all the woo-woo stuff, but it's all part of the journey. And you got to go through that to get to where you're going. Another thing, a friend of mine, well, you guys know Peter Campbell, he used to tell me, it's usually the third person you meet. It's the third person through the first person and the second person that you meet that really makes a difference somewhere down the road on your journey. Does that make sense? So, because I met...
So like the third, as in you meet somebody and they tell somebody, and person?
And then you hook up with them in some sort of way, whether it's through, say in your case, it's through a podcast interview, or, they tell you a personal story that really touches a lot of people, and then it opens up a whole new world for you. That's what I mean. So like for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's actually very interesting. Now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about a few relationships that I have, and that's
Yeah.
pretty much the case.
Yeah. So like
pretty
for
close,
me,
at
it
least.
was, Pete Melnicker. I started Titan halters for him. I learned about Buck Brannaman, got into this way of horsemanship, learned and survived a bunch of colts that I started, quote unquote. And then, later on down the road, I'm in business and I meet Peter Campbell, and we become good friends, and that opens up other doors, and it just keeps on going and perpetuates like that.
Yeah, actually, Joe, you're one of those third people, because I got around the Buck Brannaman deal, met Bill Barnes, came down here and met you. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but
that's kind of cool.
There
you
you
guys
go.
have to tread that water. That's just
Yeah,
part
you're
of the deal.
So Joe, who's the third person back that you met?
I mean, Bill might be a third person for me, because there's this gal named Marion Adele who I went to college with, and she is the one who told me to go to a Buck Brannaman clinic. Thought I'd really like it. And there I met Buck. And when I met Buck at the clinic, I was like, hey, I know you live in Wyoming. And that clinic was in North Carolina. I was like, who should I meet in this area that would be a good person to learn from? And he that day introduced me to Bill Barnes. And then that was a huge thing for me, because Bill's been an awesome mentor for me. And then I guess if we're going deeper than that, then through Bill, I met you, Ben. So I guess you're like the third or fourth person for me too. Yeah.
Damn.
But yeah.
That's probably where Carlos got the name the Lost Buckaroo.
I was wandering, now I'm found.
Going through people one after the other. Then you need to have the found Buckaroo.
That's true. That's true. We could start a whole blog on that.
That's pretty good. We finally got the Lost Buckaroo on the move.
Yep.
So that he can be found.
Yep.
So going back to your business, Carlos, I know you mentioned that it was just you for a while. Do you have people that work for you now?
Just me.
Or just you? Okay. So if you're doing all this leather work and also, running this online store still, I mean, you have to probably have at least above average time management, because I've never met anyone who does who makes knives or saddles or headstalls or whatever, and they're like, yeah, that line of work just gives you an overabundance of free time. And I can hardly imagine trying to manage a website and, like you said, run the business part of it too. So can you talk about maybe how you strike a balance with all that? Because I know I struggle with it, just riding horses for people, where I'd rather just be at the barn all day, and then eventually you have to sit down and make sure you have insurance and do your taxes and run your business and things like that.
First, I want to speak about your show deal. You guys need to go. I would highly encourage you to do that. Go to the next Pro-Am roping and set up a little table there and just visit with people, because I think it would be good for you guys. I mean, definitely do it. As far as a business thing is concerned, being an entrepreneur or sole proprietor or business owner, or whatever you want to call it, I'll go back to 2000 when I started the business. Not only was I taking website design classes, I was taking computer science classes, and I ended up getting some certifications from Microsoft and Hewlett Packard, or HP, which is what it's called now. And I was working for a place downtown repairing printers. And shortly after that, after I got a couple other certifications from Microsoft, I started working at a bank. And I ended up being a network administrator for the bank, and I ran the bank for, I think, 7.5 years by myself as a one-man show for a bank of 80 employees. And I was answering to the FDIC, and I was doing all this stuff for their computer systems. And this was shortly after back in the day, they had the big, what was it? The 2000. It was a big security thing. No,
Oh,
it was
the
Y2K.
.com.
Yeah,
Y2K.
Y2K.
Oh,
Yeah, so it
okay.
was a big deal. Yeah, the world was
Y2K.
going to
Yep.
come to
When
an
the
end
world
because the
ended.
computers weren't programmed to turn the clock over to the year 2000, whatever. I don't know. Anyway, so um, I was working there as a network administrator, and some of my friends, like Pete Melnicker and John Wilmsma, I was telling them that I was going to have to quit the bank because the Buckaroo Gear business or the chaps or whatever was just too much. I was too busy, and I was tired of working 2 full-time jobs. And at the time, my wife and I were going to start a family, and she's now my ex-wife, but we get along great. And I believe that that one of us needed to stay home with a baby. So I had to kind of take a leap of faith there. And in 2007, I quit the bank and it started doing Buckaroo Gear full time as my sole source of income. It's not as easy as you think it would be. You've got to have some sort of discipline. Like for me, there's something in me that I feel guilty if I'm not out here in the shop working. And that's not something that I don't think, I guess maybe it can be taught, but it's got to be in you because you don't have anybody over your head other than bill collectors making you get out there and get to work. So it's a two-edged sword. There's a lot of people that think, oh, it must be nice. You work for yourself. You're your own boss. You can do whatever you want to do. But on the other side of that is if you're not working, you're not getting paid. So you've got to have that discipline, just like you guys have your discipline with horses or with animals or of any kind. There's a structure, there's a schedule, there's a what would you call it, regiment, that, yeah, like you said, time management. I'm not the best at it either, but I do know that I need to be in the shop at least 6 to 8 hours a day to, number one, get stuff done. Number two, feel good about myself because I beat myself up if I'm not out here producing something in some kind of way. And then also accepting the fact that some days you're just going to be sitting at the damn computer for half a day. And I hate that because when I'm not touching leather or working with leather, I feel like I'm not getting anything done, which is a wrong way. It's a wrong way to think because as a business owner, if you're sitting at the computer, you're still getting something done, right? You're still paying a bill, you're still answering an email, you're still answering the phone or a text or whatever. But a lot of days, I might only build shops for half the day. The other half of the day is working on the computer, shipping orders, answering the phone, answering the email, or what have you. Or, paying bills, which, don't get me wrong, I am not complaining in any way, shape, or form. I love this life. I could not ever go back to working for somebody, I don't think. Obviously, if I had to, I would. But it's a hell of a lot easier now to do what I'm doing than it was when I first started because of technology and because of all the tools and the accessibility to the platforms that we have now, like, Shopify. My Shopify is your, what is this, Riverside that you guys use? Yeah. So it's a hell of a lot easier now than it used to be. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, you've got to have you've got to have discipline. You've got to have a routine. You got to be regimented in what you're doing. And although you can take any minute or any time off that you want, you just got to know that there's nobody over you telling you when and where and how to be and, punch in at this time and clock out at this time, except for the bill collectors. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, you really hit home for me because I think I have the same kind of mechanism in me. I know if it's a day I'm supposed to be at the barn riding horses and something comes up and I don't get down there for as long as I need to be, I beat myself up like crazy. And like you said, you have that guilt about it, which I do think it's important. You need to have, but you can't let you can't let the guilt make you spiral. You have to just find ways to, if you have a day where it doesn't work out, you're like, all right, well, what did I do wrong? How am I going to set up tomorrow so I get more done and feel better about what I have done
the other thing
that
that's
day?
good about, I don't know if where you ride the horses, is it on your place or do you have to go somewhere to do it?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
the property's connected. I've got about
So it's
a
basically the same
two
as my
minute
deal. So the shop is
drive.
on the same
Yeah.
property. And so I'll get to where on the weekends, I'll get to where I feel guilty if I'm not working. The only way I can really truly get a break is to leave here and go somewhere. And you got to
Yeah.
let yourself do that too, because
100%.
if you don't, you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll burn out. So yeah, it cuts both ways for sure.
Hey there, On the Move listener. Do you enjoy listening to this podcast? If you've made it this far in the episode, I assume you do. But you never know. I could just be talking to someone's house cat at this point. But if you are there and you like the podcast, the best thing you can do to help support our journey to keep this thing going is to find us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, leave a rating, leave a review, get on social media, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube. The more we can grow this, the easier it's going to become for us to put out episodes every week and get awesome guests so we can learn and stay on the move just like you. Thanks.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've harped on about on here before, because even this podcast, like our social media, we run that ourselves. If you don't, it might take you an hour to make a reel. Well, if you don't sit down and make that reel, like your phone isn't going to jump up and do it by itself. And so, yeah, maybe you're not getting paid, and maybe we don't have somebody we pay to do that yet. But when you're working on it, you're the employee of On the Move, and your boss is Ben and Joe. So it doesn't matter if you're Ben or Joe. You're Ben and Joe's employee. You better sit down, take an hour, and make that reel, because no one else is going to do it, and the podcast isn't going to go anywhere, or it won't go as far without you taking care of that. So that's been something I think we've both learned quite a bit and are in the process of learning, and it helps the horse side of what we do tremendously, because you're doing something even more menial. In fact, well, maybe not more menial, but you're not getting paid for it. You get paid for riding that horse. But sometimes this is like, I'm as lazy as anybody. Like, I don't want to do that either, but it's not going to happen by itself. And I'd sure like to see it happen. And I think Joe would like to see it happen. So we do it. And, we're kind of learning that. And it's really handy to hear it from people like you, because it's encouraging every time.
No,
You're like, well, I guess I'm not crazy. I guess other people do this too, and are learning to make that functional in their life and their business, and, take their work seriously, even if they do work for themselves. If you work for yourself, you still work for somebody. You work for you. And, so set a standard and then try to meet it. And yeah, it's kind of all on you. But like you said, why would you want to work for anybody else if you could work for yourself? Because you get to pick the standard, and then you also get to meet the standard. And so if you're having a long day, you can adjust your hours. I mean, what's the better employee-employer relationship than yourself, if you can sort that out and build the scaffolding for that relationship?
Yep. Yeah, I always say sometimes, well, I always joke around. My boss is an asshole. He won't give me the day off. But no, you can definitely, adjust it to fit your situation, just like you would with adjust to fit the situation with horses. But there's a reward in it, that you get a sense of accomplishment, at the end of every day when you're working for yourself, that I don't think people that work for, you know, a regular 9 to 5 job will get or understand. So, and, you know, for some people that's good enough. Other people, it's like me, it's just not. So.
Well, there's not a lot of people building armitas or leather gear for that fact, and I'm sure it has to do with the demand, but I'm sure it also has to do with not everybody has a knack or a desire. So, in your case, what's your favorite part of creating armitas and any other tack that you make?
It's not any. It's probably not even in the. It's not even in the creative process itself. My favorite part is seeing somebody using them. My favorite part is looking out in an arena and seeing, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it might be, pairs out there that I built, or, you know, getting feedback from a customer saying these are great, these are the best, most comfortable things I've ever had, and I enjoy a lot of the stuff. It can kind of be rudimentary and monotonous because, you know, you're building something that somebody else ordered and it's not your idea. So, you know, colors, design, shapes, whatever you have, you know, like different stamping options, flower carving, stuff like that. So there's, not to say that I don't mean that wrong, not to say that there's no reward in actually building it, because there is, because you create something brand new every time you start a pair. But there's even more reward in seeing somebody using them and being happy with them, or giving you a call and giving feedback, or shooting you a text, or seeing a photo, a random photo that's been posted up on Instagram where they didn't even tag you, which is fine. I'm totally cool with that. But, you know, there's knowing that there's thousands of pairs out there that I built is probably the most rewarding of it. And now moving on to teaching some people and seeing them be able to create their own is even more so.
Does it ever bother you a little bit when somebody hires you to build something and they have a very specific way in mind and it's different than how you would like to see it done, but you kind of do it anyway?
To be honest, yeah, it does. It bothers me. And I've gotten to where now I've been doing this long enough that I've learned how to say no. And I've had to say no before. You know, you can, you know, when you got a waiting list and you've got people that are waiting on your stuff and they want you to build it the way you want to build it, then you can just skip over some that want you to do some crazy stuff that you have never done and you know won't work. I always tell customers a lot of times that if you ask me to do something that's completely out of the ordinary, or maybe something that I won't agree with, I'm going to resent it the whole time I'm building it, and then I'm not going to turn out a product that you want anyway, and I'm not going to be proud of it. So let's not even let's not even go down that road. So, and that's a wisdom and maturity thing, getting on in time of doing this, to where now I know how to word it and hopefully deter a person from doing something that I don't think is going to work, or that I'm not going to be proud of or excited to build. The worst thing as a maker, the worst thing as a maker is when somebody sends you a picture of somebody else's work and wants you to copy it. I hate that. It's horrible, and a lot of people don't know what they're doing when they do that. Like, you know, a potential customer just sends you a picture or something and says, "I want something just like this," and there's no ill will, maybe, or, you know, they don't really know what you're doing, but what they're doing. But as a maker, it's horrible. You know, what I do is I just say, "Listen, this is somebody else's work. Can you pick out a photo of some of my work that you might like, and maybe we can make adjustments and do it that way. But I will not copy somebody else's work. That's just not going to happen."
Yeah. Well, that's even fair to the other maker, whether or not, you know, you're bothered building something that they designed. now they have someone out there trying to copy their work, and
Yeah.
that makes sense completely. Well, that's really good advice. I think we could apply that directly to riding horses for people, because Joe, you probably have a mountain of stories too, but you have people come to you and they want some wild stuff done with their horse. And what did you call it? You said when you were riding horses for people, you'd call them shit getters or something? 30-day shitters, that's what it was. Yeah, in the beginning, you got to ride the 30-day shitters, but if you want to stay in the business and keep your sanity, saying no, and then I guess learning how to say no is really important.
And it's learning how to communicate and telling somebody off without actually directly telling them off. And that's something you learn in the corporate world or at the bank, right? You know, you can get your point across without throwing the F word around and calling them an asshole. But that's something you learn as you get a little older and have a little bit more experience. But yeah, the 30-day shitters used to always be that way when I was younger riding colts. It was 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. But once you really know you're making some progress in that world is when you say it just takes as long as it takes and they write you a check. So, and then you feel really good about.
Yeah.
Then you feel really good about it, right?
Yeah,
There's no friction there on that day and that payment and the time limit and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you don't send the horse home going, it'll probably work out, I guess. I don't know. You know.
Yeah, I
there's nothing worse than that feeling.
I tried it, and there was too much heartburn in it for me. So.
So I do have one thing that I don't know if it's it's just a question about what you said, like with other people's work. It makes sense that you don't want to copy other people's work. But it seems to me like in the beginning, you know, when you have people coming to you and maybe you don't have like the portfolio that you do now, right? Like you're gonna have to do some things that maybe like push your abilities or push your boundaries. So, and I'm sure you're aware of that because you probably wouldn't have gotten to this point if you weren't aware of that. You can't just make the same pair of armitas, 1,500 times or whatever. I guess does that just come with experience? Have you had a customer where you're like, I really want to try to make this work for him, but I really don't think it's going to work out. And then you give it a whirl, and then you look at him and you're like, well, son of a gun, that went a lot better than I thought it did.
It's definitely like you said, when you're in the beginning and you don't have the portfolio, you've got to make those adjustments and do what gets you paid. So you can keep things rolling. Mm-hmm. There's a customer, like I've got to build a pair here soon that she wants me to carve feathers on the belt top in the corner, and I've never carved feathers. And I said, I've never done that before, but it might be kind of fun. So let's try it out. You've got to, like I said earlier, mm-hmm. about building some of the same stuff over and over again. You've got to do some stuff to keep it fresh and keep it from being monotonous. And so I don't mean to come off as a hard line, just saying, no, I'm not going to do that to a specific customers, but there's a balance between it too. It's just like you with a horse. If a customer came to you and said, hey, I usually ride in this English saddle with the stirrups jacked up to the moon, I want you to ride my horse that way. You're not going to do that. So, mm-hmm. But maybe that person says, I usually ride with a slicker draped across the back of the saddle. Will you ride the horse with that? And you'll say, well, sure, no problem. I can do that. I don't know. Just an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then one other question I had, because I wanted to ask you, I had this on my list before we started, and I should have brought it up earlier when we were talking about the chaps and chinks and armitas. Do you feel like there might like, say someone, they don't have any of them, and they're not leaning one direction or the other. Do you feel like there are situations or maybe like body types that lend themselves to maybe you would look better in a pair of chaps versus a pair of chinks or something like that? And you don't have to say anything that alienates your clientele, but I've always had opinions on this, and I'd be curious what someone who does it for a living thinks.
That shouldn't wear certain things, and we all know what we're talking
Carlos,
about. Right?
You're a diplomat.
So, but then there's other body types, where I got a mortgage to pay, and I'm going to do my damnedest to make them fit you. And you might not look the best in them, but they're going to fit you. And that's just the way it is. I mean, I have to charge an upcharge sometimes because somebody's really big, and I got to get 2 sides of leather. And, that's part of the, just as easily as you say no, you got to be honest with the person to say, listen, I can't build them for my base price because, I've got to buy an extra side of leather because your upper thigh is pretty darn big, right. And I'm not going to have the width in the side of leather to build them out of one side of leather. So, there is like with the armitas, the very first version of armitas that I built was what I call a Buckaroo Gear armita, and they had a fringe apron that folds from back to front. And that was how I built them originally. I built them all as step-ins, and I had to make adjustments because step-ins can be a real pain in the butt to get off. And then that fringe apron from back to front is not necessarily as flattering on some of the ladies out there. They want something that's flatter across the front. So, Peter and I came up with the idea of the Great Basin Armita where it's sewn down across the front, and you can put the little Macati loop on the side. And that's become the most popular pair that I build now, the Great Basin style with that sewn down apron on it. There'll be a lot of ladies sometimes will call and say, well, and they're honest with you, right? You brutally honest sometimes. I've got this pooch here and I'm fat here, but I'm losing weight, they always say. And, God bless them. But, you just tell them, the Armita deal, it might not be as flattering on you because of the way you're describing your sizes, and maybe you need a pair of chinks. And, if you want a pair of chinks, maybe you don't want a pair of chinks that have the stamped belt tops because they're going to dig into your Dunlap, right? You know what a Dunlap is, where your belly Dunlaps over your belt. So you instead of the stamped belt tops, maybe you just want a pair that are basic, just have chap leather belt tops on there, and they're a lot softer around your waist, and they're not digging into you all day. In the end, I want to sell something to a person that is comfortable in them and goes. We all have that piece of tack that's hanging in our barn that we generally never reach for because we just don't like it or it doesn't fit right. And in the end, I want to make sure whatever I build a person is something that, is something they're going to reach for every time. And not only that, to take it one step further, forget they have them on and jump in the pickup and drive to town. So when somebody's on the phone and describes their body shape or their type or asks questions, I'll explain to them, what might be better suited for what they're doing. And again, that's only something you can do on the phone, right? Because we're talking about sensitive subjects with body shape and size and image and stuff like that, which especially in these last couple of years, it's gotten even more sensitive.
Right. And you can, I was just going to say, you can deliver the message you're trying to deliver with inflection as well as what you're actually saying.
Exactly. You have that empathy.
And that makes a big difference.
It's just not black and white in text that says, no, you're too big for this. This won't work.
Yeah. That's not
No,
not banker speak.
no,
I
it's
wouldn't
not.
think.
That's definitely not. That's just like
No.
telling, so the banker saying you don't have enough credit to get that loan.
Yeah, Carlos, sometimes we come up with the episode title during the episode, and if polarizing content was how we popularized our channel, we'd probably call this one Fat Shaming with Carlos Macias. But we're about that time where we need to wrap this thing up. You talked about, well, obviously we've established buckaroogear.com is where people can buy your stuff. Do you have a social channel people can check out if they want to follow you? Or you also mentioned teaching people stuff.
Okay.
Anything you want to plug, go for it.
So
And we'll do that before we
Buckaroo Gear
wrap
on
up.
Instagram, which is where I'm mostly active. Used to be Facebook, now it's Instagram. At Buckaroo Gear or Lost Buckaroo on Facebook. The website, buckaroogear.com or lostbuckaroo.com. You can go on there and get all the information about the chinks that I build. There's plenty of stuff you can buy online there on the website too. I do still sell a little bit of tack, not a lot, not as much as I used to. But my mainstay has been the custom chinks, chaps, and armitas. Going back to Instagram, every time I build a pair, I post a picture up on there. So if a person's trying to decide what they really want or trying to translate to me what color they want, they can get on there and look at everything I built and, text me a picture or whatever to start the conversation. And then as far as the teaching is concerned, are you guys familiar with 310 Ranch Life? Okay, so
we're aware of them.
The
Yeah.
guys at 310, the Darnells, John, Dalton, and Joni, the whole crew over there, they've started an educational site, and it's called 310 EDU. And originally, when we first started talking about doing this over a year ago, we were kind of trying to make it like Cowboy Netflix. I'm contributing as a leather crafter, and my video series that I have on there right now is a very thorough video series on building a pair of basic chinks for somebody that wants to sort of get into it, whether you're trying to do it, just for yourself as a hobby, or you want to do it for a living. It's just a foundation on building a pair of basic chinks, and the basic chinks are not as basic as you might think. So there's a very thorough video series on there on patterning, sizing, all kinds of different stuff.
All right. Are you still running a YouTube channel as well?
So I've got, thanks for reminding me. I've got videos on there, and every once in a while I put some new stuff on there. I've got some new products that I've been trying to sell, some tap offs and pattern products for the leather crafters, so that's on there.
All righty. Yeah. Well, hey, maybe we can have you back on sometime and talk about more of this education stuff. But we better wrap it up now. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening.
Thanks for having
really
me.
Appreciate
it's been an honor to be on here. I really appreciate you guys doing what you're doing, and keep it going.
You bet.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.